In this tutorial, I'm going to show you how to make these handy little storage units. Now, I've made them in two different sizes. I will give you the sizes in the description box underneath the video. But of course, you can experiment and make these in any size that you like. But even the smaller one here is plenty big enough to hold a few reels of thread, maybe some clips and buttons and sewing notions and things like that. And the larger one, well, that'll fit even more, even ribbon reels. But have a little think maybe about giving these as a gift with some chocolates or sweets inside there. I think that would make a very special gift. Maybe even if you wrapped it up in cellophane and put a big bow around the top. They're very quick and simple to make. So if it's something that you're planning on selling, then they're not going to take you very long to make, which means you can make more in a shorter period of time. But as I said, you're only going to be using 2 circles of fabric for each one of these. Shall we get sewing? So I've cut out my 4 circles of fabric, 2 from one and 2 from a contrast fabric. This is the larger storage unit I'm going to make. And then you need to decide whether you're going to see more of one fabric than the other. So this one, I see more of the spot fabric. With this one, I'm going to do the opposite. We're going to see more of the floral fabric. But I'll leave that for you to decide depending on what kind of fabric you're going to use. So we're going to take both of these pieces, place them right sides together, and I'll pop a couple of pins in here to hold it in place. And we're going to sew all the way around the outside with around about 1/4 inch seam allowance. It doesn't have to be exactly 1/4 inch. You could use the edge of your foot as your guide, but as long as it's uniform, so long as you're stitching exactly the same distance from the edge. So it could be 1/4 inch or 6 millimeters, could be 5 millimeters, could be a little bit more. It really won't make much difference to the size of the bowl as long as you keep the same seam allowance all the way around. And take your time with this if you need to, because this is going to form the shape of the bowl. So it's important that it is circular, you don't have any wobbly lines. Let's take this out. And then we'll do the same with the second 2 pieces. So again, right sides together, a couple of pins to hold this in place. And then sew all the way around the edge. Then whichever side of the fabric you're going to see on the inside of the pocket. So in this case, I'm going to use the floral fabric. I'm going to make a small cut just in the floral side. So pinch it so that you can separate the 2 pieces. And right in the center, I'm going to make a cut of a couple of inches. So you could mark that just to be sure if you wish by folding in half and folding in half again. So you've got to cross where the center is, and again pick out the 2 sides away from each other, so you're only cutting through one side, and cut a couple of inches. And then we're going to turn this the right side out. Now you could, if you wanted to, trim the seam back to the seam allowance. I've got quite a narrow seam allowance on here, so it doesn't really matter. If your seam allowance is a little bit wider, you may wish to cut with pinking shears. And that'll help the seam to stay flat. But I think on a narrow seam like this, it's going to be absolutely fine. So just keep pulling and turning through. I'll just switch my iron on while we're waiting, because we'll need to do this with both pieces. So push it all through. If you have a point turner or some kind of tool with a rounded end, now's the time that you can push that into the curve and push the whole seam through so that it sits right on the edge of your work. So we've got 2 circles, one with a hole in the bottom. Let's do the same with the second piece. There we go, it's quite simple. Don't make the hole in the centre too big, but a couple of inches should be fine to pull this through. And you don't need to close that opening because we're really not going to see this. Again, if you don't have a turner, just put your thumb inside and run it around the edge of the seam just to bring the seam to the outside of the circle. And then we'll press that. And the same with this side. Just make sure the seam's right on the edge so your circle is a perfect circle. That's the idea with having the hole in the center so that you can turn this through, is that you don't have any hand sewing to do or closures to close on the outside of the circular seam, because a circle can be very difficult to sew closed and keep the line as a perfect circle. There we go. Okay, now we're going to measure. This is where your 60-degree ruler comes in useful. I'm going to crease this in half and find the center line, and I'm doing this on the opposite side to the one with the hole in. That's here. And just to make that clear, I'm going to draw a mark where the center is, just with a heat erasable pen. And then we'll fold this in half in the opposite direction, matching up the crease marks, and crease, and just draw a line to mark the center of that. So that's the dead center of my circle. So from here, I want to mark 60-degree lines. So the first line I drew across here, I can line up my ruler with the center, and I want to draw these 2 inches down and 2 inches from this side. You can see my circle measures 9 inches across. So 2 inches there, 2 inches there. On the smaller bowl, I measured 1.5 inches down. Then you're going to take your ruler and line up the 60-degree angle to the center of the point here. So there's my 60 degrees. That's going to sit on that center line with the edge of the ruler right in the center of the circle, and mark 2 inches from the edge. And we can do the same on this side while we're here. There's 2 inches, 2 inches from the edge. And then we'll do the same with this angle. So again, mark my 60-degree ruler. Whoops, let me turn that around. It's like making a pie. Move that over. So basically I'm making 6 lines that are equally distant. So my 60-degree line is here, joining up to the center there, and I'm marking 2 inches from the edge here and 2 inches from the edge here. So I've ended up with 6 lines all the way around the circle, all 2 inches in length. Now I'm using a heat erasable pen. This is a friction pen. Do test that on your fabric first, because sometimes it can bleach. But also be aware that if you use air erasable or water erasable ink, when you iron this, they can become permanent. So just be aware of what kind of marking tools that you use. But if you test this and it doesn't stain, it doesn't bleach the fabric, then you're absolutely fine. Then we're going to take these 2 pieces and right sides together. So my 2 pattern pieces are going together like so. And again, I'll put a couple of pins in there to hold this in place as I sew. And then we're just going to sew along those lines. So I'm just mashing this up to make sure my circles are perfectly circular. I mean, you could, if you wanted to do top stitch, around there before you put them together, but it will stay in place without that if you don't want to. And then we're going to sew. Now I find it easier to sew from the inside to the outside. Make sure you do a little back stitch at the top and the bottom of each one of those lines. So I'm lining up the edge of my drawn line right in the middle of my presser foot. I'm going to do a couple of back stitches up to the edge and back stitch. Then I like to do the one directly opposite. So same again, drop the foot, I can see right through the centre of the presser foot, over the end of the line, backwards and forwards, and then we'll carry on through each one of these different sections until we've completed the whole circle. And I'll take out my pins and snip away any loose threads. Now from these lines, I'm going to make a mark 1 inch to each side of the sewn lines. And this is where we're going to create the little folds that make the pockets around the circle. So the wider this line is, the deeper the pocket's going to be. But there again, the deeper the pocket, the smaller the base will be as well. So just before we go on, I'm just going to take away the original lines with my iron. And then we're going to hand sew. So I've taken a double thread and my needle, and where I've made the 2 marks here, I'm going to bring them together and sew them. So I'm going to hide the knot first of all on the inside of the bowl. I think I can cut the end of that off so it's not quite so long. And then just through the inside layer, I'm going to fold those 2 lines together and just make a few stitches to secure this over the top. So a thimble may help if your fabric's a little bit stiff. Knot off the thread, and if you wanted to make that extra secure, then you could always pop a little bit of wet glue over the edge. So again, let's knot my fabric, my thread, sorry, into the next mark here. Take this inside the next seam to hide the knot. Pinch those 2 lines so that they meet, and a few stitches over the top to hold them in place. And we'll continue with this all the way around the basket. And then when we've finished, we can arrange these pockets so that they're all even. Snip away any loose ends to make it nice and tidy. And then you're ready to fill with your sewing threads and notions, maybe some of your clips. In fact, you could clip some of your clips on the side. It could be buttons, it could be threads, it could be any kind of notions. I've got a little group of magnetic snaps to keep organised. So I think you'll see it's a really handy little storage unit, which is maybe a little bit roomier than you expected it to be. And there you've got the matching pair in 2 different sizes. So I hope you find this really useful. They're very fun little bowls to make. And of course, it doesn't have to be sewing notions that you keep in here. It could be sweets, it could be nuts, it could be maybe some toffees that you've handmade yourself, or any other crafty little bits and bobs that you wanted to store. But it's quick and it's fun and it's easy and it's useful, and that's the most important thing. So I hope you enjoyed the tutorial. Hope you enjoyed making yours. I shall see you again soon. Bye bye.